2A, determine the domain and range of a linear function in mathematical problems. Determine reasonable domain and range values for real-world situations, both continuous and discrete, and represent domain and range using inequalities. For the do now, I would like you to press pause on the screen after I read the directions. On the left, I give you some information. I tell you that the domain is all possible x values. The range is all possible y values. You can see where I highlighted your x values in yellow and where I highlighted the y values in blue. The domain is all your x values, but put them in order from least to greatest. And the range is all your y values. Again, put them in order from least to greatest. Given the ordered pairs -3, 8, 0, 1, -1, 7, and 2, -5, I would like you to list your domain. And in question number 2, list your range. Remember, you have to put the numbers in order from least to greatest. Click pause right here until you are finished with your do now. So the domain is all possible x values. In yellow, you're going to see my x values. There are -3, 0, -1, and 2. If we put them in order from least to greatest, we're going to get -3, -1, 0, and then 2. That's your final answer for the domain. Range is highlighted in blue. The values in my range are 8, 1, 7, -5. Put those in order from least to greatest, and your final answer is going to be -5, 1, 7, and 8. That is your range. This was a review from 8th grade. Let's move on to what we need to know for 9th grade Algebra 1. For your notes, I would like you to draw 2 separate bubbles. So the domain is all possible x values. In yellow, you're going to see my x values. There are -3, 0, -1, and 2. If we put them in order from least to greatest, we're going to get -3, -1, 0, and then 2. That's your final answer for the domain. Range is highlighted in blue. The values in my range are 8, 1, 7, -5. Put those in order from least to greatest, and your final answer is going to be -5, 1, 7, and 8. That is your range. This was a review from 8th grade. Let's move on to what we need to know for 9th grade Algebra 1. In your notes, I would like you to draw 2 bubbles. The left one, label it domain, and the right one, label it range. Domain is all x values. That means that the range is all y values. Domain are your inputs. Therefore, the range is your outputs. Domain is also your independent variable, whereas range would be your dependent variable. And lastly, but most importantly, domain runs from left to right, whereas the range is going to run from bottom to top. If you need more time to write, you can press pause here. Let's look at our first example. We're given a line segment and we're asked to find the domain. As we just learned, domain is our x value. So you're going to write that on your paper first. Now, when you want to set up your answer to write it as an inequality, we're going to put these inequality symbols around it, 2 less than symbols. Highlight your x-axis. Domain is the x value, so we're going to be looking at our x-axis only. And remember that the x-axis runs from left to right. Go to your leftmost point. Your leftmost point is right here, and it touches the x-axis at -3. So the first part of my domain is -3. Then go all the way to the right. The rightmost point touches the x-axis at 5. So my domain is all real numbers greater than -3 and less than 5. Now for the range corresponds to y. So you're going to start your answer with the y, and you're going to put your inequality symbols around the y. Range runs from bottom to top. On the bottom, this point touches the y-axis at -4. The top point touches the y-axis at +5. So my range is all real numbers greater than -4 and less than 5. On this slide, I'm going to show you how to check your answer. So to check your answer, you can put the ordered pairs of each endpoint on the coordinate plane. The location of that endpoint is -3, -4. The location of the other endpoint is 5, 5. Remember that domain goes from left to right. So I'm looking for my leftmost x coordinate to be -3. In the point -3, -4, -3 is the x coordinate. And because we're doing domain, we're looking at the x. So that checks out. And then the x coordinate of my rightmost point should be 5, and it is. So that answer is correct. Now let's check the range. Range, we're looking at the y coordinate because range is represented by y. So my bottommost point, the y coordinate should be -4, and it is. And then the y coordinate of the topmost point should be 5, and it is. So my answer checks out. Before we start this problem, let's look at these endpoints. And do you notice anything different about the endpoints in this picture versus the endpoints in the one before? Pause here and think about it. The difference is that the leftmost endpoint, it's shaded in. It has color. It's not unshaded. It's not white in the center like both of them were in the other diagram. That's going to play an important part in our answer later on. But for now, let's just continue on as we did in the last problem. The domain is X. Put your symbols around. Domain, we know, goes from left to right, just like the x-axis. The leftmost point touches the x-axis at -8. The rightmost point touches the x-axis at +4. However, look at that endpoint. That endpoint is shaded. So when it's shaded, we say that it can equal that number. It can be equal to exactly -8. So that means that that inequality symbol should be underlined. So in this case, we're looking at all real numbers greater than or equal to -8 and just less than 4. Now for the range, we're looking at y, of course. You put your symbols around it. The bottommost point touches the y-axis at -6. The topmost point touches the y-axis at +2. Now, which symbol is shaded? Is it the bottom one or is it the top one? It's the topmost point. So that means that the range can equal exactly 2. So the inequality symbol closer to 2 is going to be underlined. And we would read this as all real numbers greater than -6 and less than or equal to 2. Again, we can check our answers, check our numbers by putting the coordinates of the endpoint, the domain left to right. We should be at -8 for x, we are. We should be at +4 for x, we are. That one checks out. And then for the range, bottom, for the y coordinate, we should be at -6, we are. For the topmost point, the y coordinate should be 2, and it is. So this answer checks out. On this slide here, you can draw some more line segments with various endpoints and practice writing the domain and range as an inequality. On this slide, we're going to talk about the word problems. So I will read the word problem to you and I'll highlight as I go. The dance committee is renting a venue to host the homecoming dance. The total cost to rent the venue can be found using the function C = 50H + 150, where H is the number of hours they will rent the hall. The dance will be at least 2 hours long, but not more than 5 hours long. What is the domain and range of the situation? So remember on the first slide, we defined domain and range, and we said that domain is the input, range is the output, the input is X, the output is Y. We're not given X and Y in this problem, we have C and H. It tells you that H is the number of hours and C we're going to assume is the cost. So between C and H, which one of those variables is the input? Do you put in the number of hours and get out the cost, or do you put in the cost and get out the number of hours? It makes more sense that you put in the hours. So hours, H is your input. And once you decide how many hours you want to rent the venue, the output is then the cost. For this particular problem, they restrict the amount of hours you can actually rent the venue. What is the least number of hours that you can have the dance? In the problem, they tell us that's 2. And the most amount of hours that we can have a dance is 5. So my inputs are going to range from 2 to 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now the output is dependent on the input. The cost depends on the number of hours. So write your function C equals 50H plus 150. And we're going to substitute each input in for H. So the first one is going to look like this. It's going to look like C equals 50 times 2 plus 150. And that gives us 250. So my first output is $250. Next, you're going to input 3. You're going to have C equals 50 times 3 plus 150. That's going to give us 300. So my second output is $300. Then just keep repeating the process. The input is now 4. C equals 50 times 4 plus 150. That's going to give me 350. That's my next output. And then lastly, substitute the 5 in. 50 times 5 plus 150. That's going to equal 400. And my final output is 400. The cost is not going to exceed 400 because the number of hours cannot exceed 5. So those are my inputs and those are my outputs. Domain is your input. So my domain for this problem is going to be 2, 3, 4, and 5. The only amount of hours that we can rent this venue is 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, or 5 hours. Assume that they don't allow you to go half. You can't rent it for 2.5 hours. It has to be 2 full hours or 3 full hours. So kind of like, okay, if you go for 2 hours and 15 minutes, well, guess what? They're going to charge you the full 3 hours. So that's why the domain is exactly 2, 3, 4, or 5. Now for the range is the cost, the range is the output. The outputs are $250, 300, 350, and 400. Again, you can't rent for less than 2 hours, so the minimum range is 250, and you can't rent for more than 5 hours, so the maximum cost, maximum range is 400. So that's how you do the word problems. Make a table, an input-output chart. Your input is your domain, and the outputs you get after you calculate it, that's going to be your range. Thanks for watching this video. For more videos like this, please hit the subscribe button. Also, follow us on social media or visit us at www.almightyalgebra.com.